had some amazing coverage of the Lindell trial. Ashe, thank you for your time. I know you've been in the courtroom for a week, but what's going on in Colorado?
Yeah, thanks for having me. A lot is happening in Colorado. I've theorized on Colorado Free Press for a while that we're going to see the Rocky Mountain Showdown happen out here with the state versus federal government. And I'm a constitutionalist. You know, I believe in the 10th Amendment, but what does that look like in a environment when nobody really follows the Constitution anymore, and the state government exerting its rights is, fighting against a Republican form of government? It's very, very interesting. And we had this trial last week, as you mentioned. We have the DOJ's interest in the Tina Peters case and the weaponization investigation that they're doing there. The DOJ demanding that Jenna Griswold and the Colorado Department of State produce data from the 2020 and 2024 elections. And we have, what else do we have? We have the China news that broke on Monday about elections, which was actually a key focus of the Mike Lindell trial. So Colorado is pretty much dead center in focus on what's happening with both levels of government right now.
Yeah, the whole Second Amendment stuff too. But let's start with the trial. Tell us what you saw. How did it end up? What's the ramifications? All that.
Sure. So this is federal court. So Colorado District Court here in Colorado. And the case was Eric Coomer versus Mike Lindell. So folks will remember Eric Coomer is the one who was alleged by Joe Altman to have been on an Antifa call prior to the 2020 election and said, Trump's not going to win. I made effing sure of that. Mm-hmm. That claim Eric Coomer alleges is defamatory, that it is not true, and that it's intended to harm him, do him intentional infliction of emotional distress. He has several lawsuits. Many of them have settled, but there's still Coomer versus Trump, which is in a district court here, a state court in Colorado, and Coomer versus Byrne, which was in the federal district of Colorado, but was moved. Court found that they didn't have personal jurisdiction over Patrick Byrne, that has to be brought in Florida. So that case is brought in Florida, in the Middle District of Florida. I believe it's in Tampa. And so I'm a very opinionated person, Todd, as you know.
Oh, not really.
But as I was covering this trial, and I was in the courtroom for most of it, 7 out of the 10 days I was in the courtroom, I was trying to take all of me out of it, right? I lived through this arc. I worked for Mike Lindell at the time that he was served with this lawsuit. I was there when he was served with the lawsuit. And I tried to leave all of that out of it and really just focus on what was happening and document for people, because I think this is very much in the public interest and the people have a right to know what's going on.
Yeah.
You can't stream federal court, which is a regulation set by Congress. They could change it, but they won't, because democracy dies in darkness. But so I really tried to just document what was happening. What are the exchanges? Who's talking? What's happening in the courtroom? And at the end of it, I had a lot of people I have comments on my Substack and things of people saying, I really appreciated your trial coverage, but you're a crazy person, as they see my opinions. But so it was, we had an interesting media order. This is kind of a cool moment, I think, because the courts are now figuring out what to do about new media. You can't stream from courtroom, and you have the establishment press filing stories about the courtroom, what's happening in the courtroom on the breaks, which is the rule. But what about people that are live tweeting? What about the live blogging? This is a new phenomenon that the courts are dealing with. Inner City Press out in New York has done a great job with a number of different trials and kind of setting the path forward for a lot of us to go into the courtroom and document what's going on. I reached out to the court prior to the trial even starting, before there was a media order in the court at all. And I asked, what am I allowed to do? I don't want to violate any rules. I know what the court's standing media order is, but it doesn't cover what I do. And the clerk of the court was like, oh no, you can post from the media room. You can post from the hallway. Everything's fine. Well, the first day of trial, the court was pretty explicit. You can't post inside this courthouse.
So what are they going to do? Take your phones? I mean, how do they stop that?
No, you're allowed to document. You just can't. Okay. And the way that they stopped it, they were monitoring us for the couple of days. I had the clerk of the court over my shoulder.
Wow. The whole time. Monitoring you real time in the courtroom.
hit publish. So I didn't
Wow.
want to accidentally hit publish. So I mean, the whole thing, it's, I don't even know, hundreds of
Yeah.
posts, but I
Yeah.
was doing with my thumbs on my notepad on my phone. And then, you have 15-minute breaks. So when we had a break, I would run outside. We're on the 9th floor. So down nine floors out in front of the courthouse, and then copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste into the
Wow.
thread and post the thread, and then go back up and do it all again. It was wild. I think if I'm doing it again, and I probably will do it again, there's a lot of great court cases happening here in Colorado. I would, potentially bring like a wireless keyboard to make it a little bit easier. But
Yeah.
the point was to give people a taste of being in the courtroom and to say, what is the testimony? What is the evidence being presented? And what, people can make up their own minds. Everything
Yeah.
else, aside from the reporting that we did, Colorado Free Press, in the courtroom, or outside of the courthouse,
Mhm.
was was just straight reporting. There was no opinion, there was no anything in it, and everything aside from that was opinion. It was people's takes on what's happening. It was, and a lot of it was influencer battle stuff, right?
Yeah.
It was, this
Yeah.
guy's witness and I don't like that guy, and I tried to avoid all of that. I did give my opinions. I wrote them on Colorado Free Press, I gave them on other shows and
Mhm.
places where I was, but in the straight reporting, the thread itself of what was happening in the courtroom, I think we made a model for
Yeah,
having
definitely.
this.
No, for people that we got a lot of good comments on your coverage that we put out over the entire network. But what was the result? I mean, what did they prove that Altman was lying or not, or what was the deal?
So the jury didn't make a value statement on
Mhm.
that. There were 10 defamatory statements that were in question, and there's 3 defendants in this trial: Mike Lindell, Frank Speech, and My Pillow. And
Mhm.
as I said, I was with Mike when he was handed this lawsuit, and
Mhm.
usually he would laugh those kinds of things off. He got sued all the time. It wasn't a big
Mhm.
deal. But because they sued My Pillow, he was livid and committed to fighting.
Wow.
Find someone that loves you the way Mike Lindell loves My Pillow. He
Yeah.
will always defend her honor. And so he went pretty hard on this. The majority of statements made by Mike Lindell were about this case. How
Mhm.
dare you sue me? You're a traitor. You're
Mhm.
going to be in prison behind bars made out of melted down voting machines,
Machines.
right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
all that kind of stuff. There was one statement that he made, that was repeating the claims of Joe Altman. And then the rest of the statements were statements made by other people on Frank's speech. So
Mhm.
10 defamatory statements, 3 defendants, and they're trying to get to, there was a civil conspiracy between Mike Lindell, Frank's speech, and My Pillow to defame Eric Coomer. So,
Mm.
Mike Lindell made statements, or other people made statements on Frank's speech with My Pillow codes, promo codes on the screen. So all 3 entities have liability. That would have been a pretty damning outcome if they had been able to pull it off, especially for new media, right?
Mhm.
Should anybody that's advertising, should Tucker Carlson and Alp be held
Mhm.
accountable for liable for defamation for anything that you or I say while their promo code plays?
Right, right.
No, we don't want to live in that America. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous. And thankfully, the jury found the same thing as respect to My Pillow. My Pillow was vindicated, found to have
Mhm.
no liability in this trial. And Mike was thrilled about that. That was really what was driving him. As for the statements, it was interesting because Joe Altman's statement specifically,
Mhm.
there was new information about this call produced during this trial. So here in Colorado, we've all, been living this story where in the wake of the 2020 election, Joe Altman made these assertions about this
Mhm.
phone call. And the story here has always been no such call would ever exist. Antifa's not an organization. They don't have calls. They don't do this kind of stuff. And on the second day of Altman's testimony, so prior to this, the only evidence that we have with Joe Altman's testimony and what he alleges are his contemporaneous notes. So he says, I took notes during the call. There's a number of things, names,
Mhm.
details, topics
Mhm.
of discussion in those notes, but there wasn't any sort of corroboration for any of that. He claimed, he had a witness, but he was protecting the identity. He was, I think it's paused now, but he was being fined $1,000 a day for not producing
Mhm.
the source of, that got him on the call. I think it might still be accruing, but they're not forcing him to pay right now, I think is how that's
Right,
working.
right.
And he's also involved in the Coomer versus Trump for president. So the case that's here in Denver. But what came out on the second day of his trial is that I think it's in that case, Trump for Coomer versus Trump for president, that there was an affidavit that was produced, and this was documented back in 2021. We are just finding out about it now in this trial, but it was documented from a person named Tay Anderson, who it was a, Black Lives Matter activist, alleged to have been part of Antifa, but nobody ever admits to that. And had an affidavit in that case that laid out, I attended a call in September of 2020, and these people were on it, and these topics were discussed. There was nobody named Eric from Dominion. That statement never happened. But what that did was prove that it's the call
They had a
potentially.
call.
Yeah. And I was talking to one of our chief propagandists here. We all got real comfortable in the courtroom for 10 days. People that normally would not associate with each other were talking. But I asked him on a break, how are you going to report the fact that there was no call and now there is a call? And it was like I was watching the Matrix reprogram itself in real time. And he was like, well, there was always a call. I mean, I always assumed that there was a call. And I was sitting there going,
you see the in the head
like,
itself?
Yeah, it's always been Joe made the whole thing up. And in fact, at the end of Altman's direct examination by the plaintiffs, the Eric Coomer attorney said there was no call, was there? You made it all up. And then the next day there was the affidavit entered into evidence. So that was a really interesting sort of dramatic moment in the trial. The jury did not take a position on whether or not they believe Joe Altman's story or not. But I will say that his statements were not found to be defamatory as the 10 statements. I think one of them was Joe Altman's. The 3 statements that were found to be defamatory were a statement on May 9th. Mike called Coomer a traitor. And on April 6th, that was May 9th of 2021. And on April 6th of 2022, he made a statement after he was sued. And I think it was the prison bars one that I mentioned, a statement like that. So Mike Lindell was found liable for those 2 statements, 2 of 10. They found no civil conspiracy, no intentional infliction of emotional distress, no malice, and they awarded no punitive damages to Eric Coomer on behalf of Mike Lindell, the defendant. So that is, I think, a great outcome for Mike. Now, prior to the trial, the court had already ruled that these statements were defamation per se, meaning by themselves they're defamatory, and the jury needs to determine what the liability landscape is. So that was, it's kind of weighted against the defendants to prove that, they shouldn't have liability for all of these statements and across all of these defendants. It was the total award for Mike Lindell was a little over $440,000. Eric Coomer was asking for $62 million.
Yeah.
So that is, a lot of people are saying this isn't a win. Mike lost. I mean, it's civil court, so it's not a reasonable doubt standard that we're dealing with. We're dealing with 51%, and the I found the courtroom, the way that the judge held her trial to be incredibly fair. She was incredibly patient. I thought she allowed both sides some leeway in different areas. I also thought that the jury was really engaged, taking their jobs very seriously. It was great to experience in the courtroom. So the brunt of the liability in this case, Todd, was Frank's speech. And so Frank's speech was found liable for the 2 statements that Mike Lindell made, plus one additional statement that was made by Professor Clements at the Cyber Symposium in August of 2021. And that statement, if folks watch the Cyber Symposium, they will remember that Professor Clements did a fable, like a legal fable at the end of the presentation. And he was talking about this gang member case that he had done back when he was practicing attorney, but kind of drawing parallels to the election fraud and the players involved. And during that, he sort of editorialized the claims about Eric Coomer and placed him into the fable. The jury did find that that was defamatory. On that, they found 1.5 million plus 300,000 punitive damages. So total punitive damages that Eric Coomer was awarded was about $300,000. Again, he was asking for $62 million. And then they found also no civil conspiracy, but they did find on behalf of Frank's speech, intentional affliction of emotional distress, which is how we get to the punitive damages. All in all, it was $2.3 million total award across Mike and My Pillow. And as I said, I interviewed Mike on my Monday night show, a couple hours after the verdict
Yeah.
came down, and he was thrilled.
Wow, interesting outcome. So, is he going to appeal this?
He is planning to appeal the decision against Frank's speech, I believe.
I see.
Yes.
So Murph has a comment I just want to bring up. Said the Altman did a read through on the jury instructions, which were skewed massively in Coomer's favor. Weren't allowed to talk about Coomer in person. Is that
The person is what he's
yeah?
saying. So what he's referring to is the evidence of Eric Coomer crashing his truck into the
Mhm,
building, fleeing the scene, and then lying to police about it.
mhm,
That wasn't in his writings about his sexual endeavors with his wife.
mhm,
That was not in. His history of drug abuse was not in. And I believe that was the court found that even though it had a little bit of relevance to credibility, it would be unduly prejudicial. However, the Antifa manifesto, the posts about President Trump, the fact that Eric Coomer was out on his Facebook telling all of his friends and family to stop being a part of his life, unfollow me, untrump me. He was trying to make a hashtag go viral back then on Facebook.
I remember that. Yeah.
Which is hilarious. But untrump me, all this kind of stuff, all of that was presented to the jury. So I think that's a little bit of a split in terms of
Mhm,
what was allowed. And whenever there's these kinds of, I did trial in the same, I was a couple floors below where
mhm.
this courtroom was, but same courthouse, same. I was a little bit of PTSD actually being in that
Yeah, I
courtroom again,
bet.
because it
Yeah.
looked exactly the same. But going through that process, and I defended myself. I had attorneys for a while, but then I didn't feel like they were doing a good job, so I
And you
fired them and I
won.
defended
And
myself.
you
We won on a
yeah.
52C motion. Yeah, I didn't even
Mhm.
have to bring my defensive case in chief, which I was a little bummed about because I worked really hard on it. but but
But I'm
yeah, I
gonna
mean,
say this.
yeah, so the rules that govern this process,
Mhm,
there's the letter of the rules, and then there's the court's discretion around the rules, and there's a balance between, relevance is a very low bar, but you have to weight it against, is this going to be unduly prejudicial? So whenever there's something like this, like what Murph is saying,
mhm,
it was massively skewed, it was this and this. I personally don't believe that.
mm,
I think that the judge was walking a tight line on relevance and prejudice before the jury. That would be instantly appealable, I think,
mhm,
for Coomer if the judge had allowed all of that evidence in, because there's a clear case. The stuff about him, him and his wife's sexual relationship, which was horrifying. But that's, I mean, what does that have to the relevance of whether he was defamed about Dominion voting systems?
yeah, yeah,
You have to think about this as, how would I want to be? This is how I always think about it. If there's a decision coming down from the judge that seems like, what is this?
mm,
Reframe it as, what if this is happening to you?
sure,
And having gone through this process, I do that pretty much anytime. And I didn't see bias. Now, the jury instructions, several people people involved in the case have said that
mhm,
they were written in a confusing way. I think that as it pertains to Frank's speech, that is true. I don't believe that the platform versus publisher distinctions were effectively made for the Frank speech as a defendant. It was, mostly focused on Mike and My Pillow.
mhm,
And I think that was, kind of how they got to liability. I also called that, by the way, on Friday when the case went to the jury. I had not made a prediction. Everybody kept asking me, who do you think is going to win? What's going to happen?
mhm,
What's going to happen? I said, not doing this until I see the jury instructions. I didn't see the jury instructions until this week, but I felt pretty confident in my prediction. And my prediction on the Friday before the case was decided was My Pillow will have no liability. Frank's speech will have some liability because I don't think the platform distinction was made strongly enough to the jury. And Mike Lindell is a toss-up. I don't think he should be liable for defamation, but I do think the plaintiffs did a good job in front of the jury of confusing that issue. And they're going to try to get to something for Coomer, because
Your government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Because they made Eric Coomer had a crack legal team. It
Of
could
course
not,
he did. The
yeah,
best
it could
money could
could
buy.
not
Yeah.
have been cheap,
Yeah.
right?
No,
There
no
was
kidding.
they were excellent. I thought that they did a great job of presenting his interests and doing the work that they were paid to do for the jury because of the assumed value of his legal team. I can't imagine that these guys are happy with this outcome, that the $2.3 million total, right, is going to move the needle the way that they wanted it to move in this portfolio of lawfare they're doing.
Yeah, because this has ramifications
Mhm.
follow on, right? Of course. So what about Altman? How did he come out of this, in your opinion?
So
If you don't
Joe
want to
Altman
say, that's
still
fine.
has, I believe,
Yeah.
still has a case pending, and that's the one thing to think of is just like the Tay Anderson affidavit was brought into this case being filed in a different case, relevant, right? But it's filed. I mean, if it's filed in court, it's a part of an official record, even if it's under seal, right? It's still a part of the record, and so Joe Altman's testimony. Now, the one thing I will say about Joe is that his testimony has always been consistent, and I'm sure I mentioned this before, is that the affidavit confirmed a lot of the details from Joe's handwritten notes. So when he says, okay, so there was a call, it's not just that there was a call, it's that there was a call at the same time period that confirmed a lot of the details, same names of people, same
Wow.
discussion topics on the call, right? We're going to organize a protest for Breonna Taylor. We're going to talk about what to do about Joey Camp. Joey Camp was a local kind of citizen journalist / agitator that would show up at all manner of protests and events in 2020 and 2021. And the BLM Antifa crowd that was on this call, that they wanted to figure out what to do about Joey Camp because he kept infiltrating them and making them look bad and, riling things up. They were concerned about this. In Joe's notes, for example, it says, Joey Camp, they want to kill him. Right. So, it is confirmed, right? Like the details of his notes were confirmed by the affidavit. Now, again, doesn't say that Eric Coomer was there. It doesn't say that Eric from Dominion was there. It doesn't say anything about elections or election rigging or anything happened on the call, but it does create, I mean, certainly for me as,
Doubt. Yeah.
been here living this since 2020 to see, oh my gosh, there actually was a call, right? Like
Yeah. No
that,
kidding.
that was new information for us. And so Joe, I think, his story has been consistent since he's told it. I haven't heard any inconsistencies going back to 2020 since he's told his story. He is, I believe, going to be on the hot seat again as the next Coomer case that he's involved in goes to trial. And the record of this case will inform that case. It will inform Coomer versus Byrne. That's how this works, right? And certainly when they're doing a portfolio of cases, Coomer versus the world, in that portfolio, they're looking to build that record. I think they're looking to get, whatever awards they can. They settle some cases, they get some money, they move forward. I think obviously the big prize is President Trump, trying to make President Trump liable for this. I don't think there's any universe in which they get there, but we'll see what happens.
Wow. Thanks for the fantastic reporting. And
Yeah.
you're not going to get this anywhere else, guys. Ashe has been, straight up on this. So what about the show? Tell us what you're going to do going forward. I mean, the show is really popular. It's one of our, if not the best viewed show, it's up there. So tell us what's going on with the new version of the Colorado show.
Yeah, so we moved the show to Wednesdays. Sundays are tough. Sunday afternoon, especially, is tough for people. And here in Colorado, people are out enjoying at this time of year, out enjoying the beautiful state that we live in. So we moved the show to be kind of your midweek Wednesday lunch break. It's your midweek lunch break with us, and it's it is a more entertainment value show. I was watching this show this morning as before coming on. I'm like, this is so serious. I can't wait to get back to your interview with Arbuckle because I thought that was great, and I was disappointed when it paused.
Yeah.
But we talk about the cases going on. There's the weaponization of government investigation. There is the Trump administration, coming in and sort of more flexing this. There's a couple election fraud things that I want to talk about as well, but we'll get to that in a second. On the Colorado show, we try to deal with the stories that more conservative audience would care about, but we treat them with the level of respect that they deserve. So there's a lot of jokes. The best jokes are rooted in truth, and a lot of those jokes are occupying space in the Colorado executive branch. So we have a lot of fun with it. You get good. It's exactly an hour. There's no overtime or anything. We end exactly at an hour, and which is nice because pretty much all of my other shows are like, well, let's just keep going.
Yeah,
So
no, I feel
it's
your
nice
pain
to
on
have
that.
the time box.
So I love the sound effects that Darren puts out, I have
Yeah,
to say.
Darren's the best. Yeah, and Darren was born here in Aurora, Colorado, and he lives in Florida, down in the Fort Lauderdale area. But the show is, Karen and I are both here, and so it's basically us trying to convince him that it is really as bad as we say, and a lot of the times that requires sound effects. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. So what else do you want to get out? There's so much to talk about in Colorado.
Yeah, so I think that one of the big things to watch is that in, shortly after, folks will remember, I think it was in March, after President Trump came into power again, the DOJ announced that they were looking into the case of Tina Peters and specifically the weaponization of government against Tina Peters. As part of that, there have been, requests for information that have gone out. A lot of this has happened out of the public eye, but we got a glimpse last week when might have been Monday actually of this week. It's all blending together. When the DOJ came at the CDOS, Colorado Department of State, Jenna Griswold's entity, and said, you guys haven't complied with these data requests. They requested in May. It's been 30 days since they requested the information about the 2020 and 2024 elections here, and CDOS is not complying. They are, trying to make 10th Amendment arguments and whatnot. But the problem with giving the federal government power when you like who's in charge of it is that the government has that power when you don't like who's in charge of it. And the reality is that prior to January 20th of 2025, the Colorado executive branch and the U.S. Department of Justice were pals.
Oh,
They
yeah.
were, acting in lockstep, certainly with Tina Peters and with other investigations as well. Ours, the Department of Justice has a statement of interest in our case, which is on appeal right now. So we won at trial, as I mentioned, but then the plaintiffs appealed, and that's sitting before the 10th Circuit. I'm defending myself in that action as well. So I got to learn appellate law as well, which was fun.
Are you using AI in your pro se defense? I'm just
I
curious.
use AI to check my work and to make recommendations and suggestions. So I've never used AI to write for me in any capacity,
Yeah.
but to I would, get an outline of my brief or later on the brief. And actually I was really resistant to it. This is something where Darren kind of forced me to do it on the appeal. I was at an event, speaking at an event, and the new DOJ statement of interest dropped. And it was, the court needs to remand this case for another trial, which is a ridiculous position to hold because in my case, there was no evidence, none. The court said the plaintiffs failed to produce any evidence that can even remotely be considered intimidating. It was a decisive victory. But then they appealed and the DOJ came in and appealed. And I freaked out when that happened. I'm like, how can this still be happening? How is this? And Darren was actually my, Colorado show co-host. He was like, you need to use AI. You need to get from a research standpoint, from a, structuring standpoint. So he actually built the models for me, and I would just give him my work product, and then he would run it through and it would kick out recommendations and suggestions and things to consider. Anytime it produces case law or any sort of factual assertion, you need to fact check it because AI hallucinates. But no, not for writing. I wrote all my briefs, and you can tell when if you read the briefs that I wrote, they're very much not written by a lawyer. They're very much written by me. And but it's an incredibly powerful tool, and the problem or the decision framework, right, around employing AI for any sort of creative work or, or legal work, is to use it it's a tool to use in the appropriate context. So I use it for research. I use it for, like I said, I would submit the brief to it, upload the brief to it, and it would go section by section and say, you could make this argument stronger. You might want to consider taking this angle. And it was kind of like having a team of paralegals, at my disposal. So that was great. And huge shout out to Darren, because I was super resistant. I'm like, I can't even learn or train a model right now. I have no time, right? I just need to sit down and do it. And he took on a lot of that. In my case,
well, I was just asking
great
because
friend.
Chris Gleason has used that down in Florida, and there's so much going on in the Broward County stuff. I mean, and they're giving sanctions on pro se litigants now. They're trying to, because you
They
got to
tried to
be
sanction
right.
me. Yeah.
Really interesting. What else?
Yeah,
Anything
Chris
else?
Gleason has been ahead of the game on AI. He and I
Yeah.
have been talking about,
Good.
election
Good.
stuff since 2020, 2021, and he's been ahead of the game on the use of AI in this. He's great.
Yeah, totally. What else, Ash? Anything
Yeah.
else?
So in that weaponization of government, endeavor investigation, we're going to see other things. Now, we had the China news come up this week from Kash Patel saying we have evidence that China was doing this thing with these IDs, fake IDs, producing fake IDs. And that ties to a mail-in ballot scheme. This is intelligence that was in August of 2020. So before the election, the intelligence community had this evidence that China was working on a fake ID scheme. They also had physical evidence and corroboration from another agency, because CBP had caught Chinese nationals with a whole bunch of driver's licenses that matched the facts of what was being alleged. The intelligence community, according to and this came up in the Mike Lindell trial as well, which was just a incredible synchronicity. The allegation is that the intelligence community withheld credible evidence of Chinese election interference, not influence. So that's a distinction that you'll hear the election regime may, there might have been influence, but there wasn't interference. They're saying there might have been bot activity or trying to change hearts and minds, a nation state, pretending to be Americans, trying to change hearts and minds online. That is not what the intelligence showed. The intelligence showed interference, and they withheld it. They thought that that the Chinese intelligence, all 17 intelligence agencies, thought that the Chinese intelligence would help President Trump, and so they withheld it. And then, after the election, they told us all there was just no evidence. There's no evidence that anybody engaged foreign interference. That's not real. That can't be. So a big part of Mike Lindell's allegations was that China stole the election, right? Using hammer and scorecard and all of the assertions that he made. But a key thing that came up in this trial, and over on Badlands, John wrote the devolution theory in starting in 2021, and it's like 25 parts that span 2 years. But the seventh installment of that focused on this letter from John Ratcliffe, who was then the acting DNI, and it's January 7th of 2021. And what we've always kind of looked at and focused on is the Chinese allegations, right? In the letter, he says, I disagree with the intelligence community about Chinese interference. I think that there is evidence of Chinese interference. And that's always what we've sort of focused on when it comes to that letter. But in the context of this trial, a big part of Mike's defense is every time I tried to get information to people that could do something, I was blocked. And this concept of blockers came up over and over again at trial. I think it really crystallized by the end of trial that it was any sort of obstruction from the truth about elections coming out. And that was happening from government entities, from, these experts and the kind of private part of the public-private partnership, and as well as the media. Everybody was carrying that forward. So rereading John Ratcliffe's January 7th, 2021 letter, which is, his assessment of the intelligence as the ODNI, all 17 agencies are reporting up through him. In that letter, it's not just Chinese influence, Chinese interference. It's the intelligence community is covering this up for political purposes. It's explosive. It was known in 2021, but I feel like, a lot of us didn't really have eyes to see it because we didn't have, the past 4 years of experience on this. So that is heating up and really interesting. We see normie people who don't talk about election fraud at all now talking about Chinese interference in the 2020 election. And that is also a record that is building. If you think
Wow.
about Colorado in 2020, they sent 22,000 postcards out to illegals or non-citizens asking them to register to vote. Whoops, sorry, we didn't mean to do that. It was, nobody actually voted, so it's fine. Then the following year in 2022, it was 30,000 postcards. I had the Deputy Secretary of State on the stand. I cross-examined him and I asked him about it. It's a data coding mismatch between the ERIC system and the Colorado DMV, all of these technology-based, code-based systems that come together into this, really complicated, centralized machine that run our democracy. The truth about these systems is coming out. So
Complicated so that things like that can happen, so
100%. Yeah. Centralization creates complexity, and complexity breeds and hides corruption. And in the wake of Tina Peters' trial, or in the wake of Tina Peters' office being raided in August of 2021, they changed the law. And they changed the law to take power and statutory authority away from the clerks, the local election officials that we elect, right? They're elected officials and elections officials because they oversee elections. That's who we, the voters, elect to run our elections, but they don't actually have any power. They didn't have much before this, but after this, their authorities over any, and the counting the machines, all of that were taken out of their hands and centralized in the hands of the Secretary of State. And Tina Peters was the stated reason for that.
Wow.
So it's, we're pretty far along with communism here. I heard you talk about, Marxism, Leninism. This is it is the preferred ideology of the state government of Colorado. We see it happening across domains, whether we're talking about the transing of kids and taking kids away from parents if they're non-affirming parents, which non-mutilating parents is how I refer to that.
Right.
We see it with the migrant issue. We are a sanctuary, and the gaslighting is insane on that, right? All of these elected officials have come out and said, "Oh, we're not a sanctuary. We actually have sanctuary status laws on the books here. We absolutely are."
It's amazing that they can just deny it, and the
Yeah.
Second Amendment stuff too. I have a question. Dennis Montgomery, I was at the cybersecurity conference with Lindell years ago, and that was the big focus then. It was the big drop that was going to happen. How did that come out in the trial? I mean, I scanned what you wrote, but tell us how he was represented, or how it was appeared.
So Dennis Montgomery's testimony came in through video deposition. So it was a mashup of clips put together over a deposition that was 2 days. And it was probably 20 minutes total of, 20-minute excerpts mashed together of what was probably 16 hours of deposition, I would think, or something close to that. That's just my guess. It was put together by the plaintiffs. So the mashup of his testimony was meant to make him look not credible. And he did not come off as credible to me. It seemed to contradict himself repeatedly. And it was all very kind of, well, yeah, they can do it, but I can't prove how they do it. And yeah, I watched it happen, but no, I wasn't the one doing it, but I'm the only person who can run the system. And so there was a lot of contradictory statements about how hammering scorecard works and what his role was. And he refused to talk about sources and methods. So nothing about how he got the information, but he did claim that he was contracted by the CIA to build this scorecard tool. And I mean, very high level, non-technical, how this works is this is the allegation. Hammer was this signals intelligence tool that was kind of scanning all of the systems and listening, right? Monitoring what was happening inside the US as well as outside the US. And Dennis Montgomery was contracted to build scorecard for the CIA, which would leverage this signals intelligence monitoring platform, but allow them to interfere. And so it got pretty technical at times, but because of the way that the testimony came in and the way it was, mashed up and presented, it didn't play as credible. He kind of seemed like a little crazy person. Yeah.
It's like ABC, editing the videos. You can make it look like whatever you want.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
CBS or whoever it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I have no doubt, Todd, that there is a that the technical experts throughout our intelligence communities and our defense capabilities in the United States could do something like that, right? I don't know how you'd prove it.
I don't really have an
Yeah.
opinion on it. I was just curious because I'm curious.
Yeah.
Wanted to know what it looked like. Ashe, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll have you back soon. Check out the Colorado
definitely.
show Wednesday at 12 o'clock Mountain.
Mountain.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. So
Cool.
2 Eastern. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah,
We'll see
thanks
you
for
next
having
time.
me.
Take care, Ashe.
Bye.
Ciao.